A military working dog burst through the automatic doors of Harrowfield Regional Medical Center and ignored every single person in the building. Until it didn't. The German Shepherd moved like it had a mission. Past the security desk, past the nurse's station, past the attending physicians who stepped back and stared. It stopped in front of a nurse standing at the end of the hall, holding a clipboard, and pressed its head hard against her arm like it was coming home. 3 seconds later, the parking lot filled with black government vehicles. Every window in the hospital had someone's face pressed against it. Nobody knew who she really was. They were about to find out. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because this channel is where stories like this live. Stories that will make your jaw drop, your heart race, and your faith in quiet strength completely restored. Hit the like button if you're already hooked, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go. The shift started at 6 in the morning, same as always. Lauren Mercer clocked in 7 minutes early, the way she had every single workday for the past 4 years at Harrowfield Regional Medical Center. She hung her jacket in her locker, snapped her badge onto her scrub top, and stood at the small mirror bolted above the sink long enough to pull her hair back and nothing more. She did not look at herself the way some people looked at themselves, searching for something, reassuring something. She just made sure her hair was out of her face, because hair in your face when you're working a trauma bay will get someone killed, and that was the only reason that mattered. Harrowfield Regional sat at the edge of Dunmore, Colorado, a mid-sized city that sat between 2 mountain ranges and never quite made up its mind about what it wanted to be. Not big enough to be a real metro, not small enough to be a tight-knit town. The hospital served the county, and then some, a level 2 trauma center that pulled patients from 4 surrounding counties when the weather turned bad and the highways turned worse. Winter was 6 months of the year here. The other 6 months were just a different kind of difficult. Lauren worked the general medical floor, Ward 6C, which the nurses called the catch-all ward because it took everything that didn't belong somewhere more specialized: post-surgical overflow, internal medicine, the occasional patient being held for observation who had nowhere else to go. It was not a glamorous assignment. The doctors who rotated through 6C treated it like a layover, not a destination. The nursing staff was chronically short because turnover was high, and administration had decided that acceptable staffing ratios were a suggestion rather than a requirement. Lauren had worked it for 4 years and never once asked to be moved. She knew every patient's name within a day of admission. She remembered which ones slept badly and which ones were afraid to use the call button because they didn't want to be a bother. She was the nurse who noticed things. The slight change in a patient's breathing pattern 3 hours before it became a clinical emergency. The way an elderly man's hands shook a little harder on the mornings his son didn't visit. The moment when someone had stopped fighting and nobody else on the floor had caught it yet. None of this made her popular with administration. It made her invisible to them, which she had decided long ago was preferable. She was pulling a fresh IV bag from the supply room when she heard the heels. She recognized them before she saw the woman attached to them. Director Sylvia Raines had a particular rhythm to her walk. Quick, deliberate, with a slight extra beat at the end of each step, like a period at the end of a sentence. Sylvia was the Director of Patient Services and Nursing Operations, which was a title that meant she supervised everything and was responsible for none of it when it went wrong. She had been at Harrowfield for 11 years, and in those 11 years she had developed a talent for appearing at the exact moment something could be turned into a problem. Mercer. Lauren turned around, IV bag in hand. Morning, Director Raines? I need to see your incident report from Tuesday, the one for the Galveston patient. I submitted it Thursday. It should be in the system. It's not formatted correctly. Lauren paused for one beat. I used the standard form. The standard form was updated last month. You used the old version. Sylvia said it with a flatness that was somehow worse than anger. You need to redo it, today. I have a full patient load today. I can get it done on my lunch break. I need it by noon, Lauren. She said the first name like she was correcting a child. This isn't the first time you've submitted incomplete documentation. I'm starting to wonder if this floor is the right fit for you. There were 3 other nurses in the supply room. Lauren felt them go still. She did not flush. She did not raise her voice. She looked at Sylvia Raines directly, which she had learned early was the thing that made people most uncomfortable, and said, "I'll have it to you by noon." Sylvia looked at her for a moment, as if waiting for something else. A flinch, a stumble, anything that would make the moment more satisfying. She didn't get one. She turned and walked out, heels marking time on the linoleum. One of the other nurses, a younger woman named Priya, who had been at Harrowfield for 8 months, let out a breath. "She does that to you a lot." "She does it to everyone," Lauren said. She put the IV bag under her arm and walked back out onto the floor. That was how most mornings started. By 9:15, Lauren was managing 3 patients simultaneously. A 62-year-old post-op who was running a low fever that nobody else had flagged, a 40-year-old man recovering from a respiratory infection who kept pulling out his oxygen line because he wanted to call his wife, and a 17-year-old brought in after a car accident whose parents had not been reached yet and who kept asking the same question over and over in a voice that was too steady to be okay. "Am I going to be fine?" "Yes," Lauren said the 4th time. "Your scans came back clean. The doctor confirmed it. You have bruising and a mild concussion, and both of those things heal." She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat in it instead of standing over him, which was something she had started doing years ago because she had learned that height is a kind of power, and sometimes what a person needed was for you to give it up. "What's your name? Your actual name, not what's on your wristband." He blinked. "Marco." "Marco, I'm Lauren. I'm going to be here until 6 tonight, and if you need anything, you hit that button and I come, okay?" He nodded. Something in his face settled slightly. She stood, checked his chart one more time, and moved on. She ate lunch at her station, which was not actually lunch. It was half a granola bar and a cup of coffee that had been sitting in the pot long enough to taste like a grievance. She finished the incident report while she ate, reformatted it in the new template, double-checked every field, and submitted it at 11:47. She did not send Sylvia a notification that it was done. That would have looked like she was asking for approval. And Lauren had learned a long time ago not to ask for approval from people who had already decided not to give it. The afternoon was the kind of steady that felt deceptive. Busy enough that you couldn't stop, calm enough that you thought you could breathe. Lauren changed an IV line, talked a patient through a breathing exercise, caught a medication discrepancy before it became a dosing error, and reported it through the proper channel, which meant filling out another form and submitting it to pharmacy, which would take 3 days to acknowledge, and would appear in nobody's statistics because near misses didn't count in the tallies that got reported to the board. She was 3 steps from the elevator, heading to collect discharge paperwork from the floor below, when she heard Sylvia's voice behind her. "Lauren, a moment." She turned. Sylvia was standing near the nurse's station, and this time she was not alone. Beside her stood Dr. Graham Finch, the chief of internal medicine, a man Lauren had spoken to perhaps 12 times in 4 years. He was in his mid-50s, well-maintained in the way that men with expense accounts and gym memberships managed, and he had the particular expression of someone who had been told something just before entering a room and was still arranging his face around it. "I've been reviewing your documentation record," Sylvia said. Her voice had acquired a new register, still flat, but with something performed underneath it, like she was saying these words for an audience, even though the only people in earshot were 2 nurses at the station who were pretending not to listen. "Across the last quarter, you've had 4 formatting errors on required reports." Lauren stood still. One of those was the form update I wasn't notified about. "Regardless, there's also been a complaint from a family on the floor last month regarding your communication style." That one was new. "What complaint?" "A family member felt you were brusque during a difficult conversation." Lauren said nothing for a moment. She thought about the conversation Sylvia was almost certainly referring to. A family who had wanted her to tell them something she couldn't tell them. A prognosis that wasn't hers to give. A request to just say that everything was going to be fine when the chart said otherwise. She had declined. She had done it as gently as she knew how to do it, and then immediately called the attending to have the proper conversation with them. "I referred that family to the physician after they felt dismissed. After they asked me for a medical prognosis, I'm not licensed to provide." Dr. Finch cleared his throat. "Lauren, we just want to make sure you're still a good fit for the environment here. The standards of communication on 6C are something we take seriously." "I take them seriously too," she said. Sylvia took a half step forward. Maybe this floor isn't the right place for you right now. She said it quietly, which was worse than if she had said it loudly. I'd like you to consider whether a transfer to an administrative support role might be a better... You're suggesting I move off the floor. I'm suggesting you reflect on whether your current role is serving the patients and the team. Lauren looked at her. Then she looked at Dr. Finch, who had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, which was the most decency he'd shown in the entire exchange. Then she looked back at Sylvia. I'll think about it, she said. She turned, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button. Behind her, she heard Sylvia say something low to Finch, and Finch give a small sound of agreement. She did not turn around. The elevator arrived, and she stepped into it, and the doors closed. She wrote it down one floor, collected the discharge paperwork, wrote it back up. Then she went back to work. The dog arrived at 4:52 in the afternoon. Lauren was at the medication cart outside room 614 when she heard the doors at the far end of the hall bang open. Not the usual pneumatic sigh of the automatic entrance, but an impact, the kind that meant someone had hit them hard coming through. She looked up. The German Shepherd was moving fast, leash trailing behind it, and the young army corporal attached to the other end of the leash was being pulled rather than guiding. The dog's head was up, ears forward, nostrils working, and it was moving with the focused, economical speed of an animal that knew exactly where it was going and was not interested in anything that wasn't the destination. Every person in the hallway moved out of the way. The dog went past the nurse's station, past the medication cart, past 3 open patient room doors. It slowed as it reached Lauren and then stopped completely, pressing the full side of its head against her left arm with a force that was almost enough to make her take a step sideways. It made a single low sound, not a whine, not a bark. Something between. Lauren looked down at it. The corporal arrived 2 seconds later, out of breath, apologetic. I'm so sorry, I don't... He just pulled straight toward the entrance. I couldn't... He stopped, looked at the dog, looked at Lauren. Ma'am, has he... Do you know this animal? Lauren set down the medication she was holding with a care that was very precise, very deliberate. What's his name? She asked. The corporal blinked. Sergeant. His working name is Sergeant. Lauren reached down slowly with her right hand and touched the back of the dog's neck, just behind the ears, in a spot that was very specific. The dog leaned harder into her arm. Okay, she said quietly, mostly to herself. Okay. Ma'am? The corporal was watching her with an expression that had moved past confused into something closer to uncertain. From down the hall came a different kind of sound. The crunch and hiss of vehicle tires on the pavement outside the hospital entrance. More than one vehicle. And the muted percussion of doors opening and closing with the organized efficiency that only comes from people who practice it. Lauren did not move. She was still looking at the dog when the second set of footsteps came through the entrance doors, and these ones she recognized before she turned around, not because she knew the sound specifically, but because she knew the pattern. The even, unhurried cadence of someone who had nothing to prove by walking fast. She straightened up slowly. The man who had come through the door was in his early 50s, wearing army service uniform with the kind of quiet precision that meant the ribbons on his chest were not decorative. He was accompanied by 2 others in matching uniforms, and behind them, visible through the glass doors, 3 more in tactical gear were taking positions near the vehicle. The man stopped 6 feet away from her. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, Mercer. Lauren held his gaze. Colonel. The hallway was not silent. Hospitals are never silent, but the particular ambient noise of Ward 6C, the beeping, the rolling carts, the murmur of patient televisions, the overlapping conversations at the nurse's station, all of it seemed to recede, the way sound recedes when the brain decides something more important is happening and needs the full bandwidth. Priya, standing 15 feet away at the station, had stopped typing. Sylvia Raines was at the end of the hall, having come out of an office to see what the noise was, and she was standing very still in the way people stand when they are trying to figure out what they are looking at before they decide how to feel about it. Dr. Finch had come out of a patient room and was holding a chart against his chest like it might be useful. The colonel, His nameplate read Ashworth, and he wore the insignia of a full colonel with a special operations patch that was not on most uniforms. Looked at Lauren with an expression that was not warm, exactly, but was the kind of calm that came from knowing someone for a long time and trusting them completely. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm on shift until 6, Lauren said. "I know." He glanced down at the dog, who had not moved from Lauren's side. "Sergeant found you faster than I expected." "He always had good navigation." Ashworth almost smiled. It was a small thing, and it passed quickly. "You look the same." "I got older." "We all got older." He looked at the hallway around them. The gaping nurses, the frozen physicians, Sylvia Raines at the end of the hall doing a calculation behind her eyes that you could practically hear. "We can find a private room, or we can do this here. Your call." Lauren considered it for exactly 2 seconds. "Here's fine," she said. Ashworth nodded once. He reached inside his jacket and produced a sealed document folder. Not a briefcase, not a ceremonial case, just a standard military document folder, government issue, worn at the corners in the way things get worn when they have traveled a long way and been handled by many hands. He held it at his side rather than opening it immediately. "I know you weren't planning to hear from us," he said. "And I know you made a choice when you separated. I respected it. We all did." He paused. "But there's a situation that's come up that involves you directly, and you needed to know about it. And Sergeant needed to see you because, frankly, he's been a problem since the last handler rotation, and Command was starting to think we'd have to retire him." The dog made a sound against Lauren's arm. She put her hand on his head again, without looking down. "What kind of situation?" she asked. Ashworth opened the folder. The first thing he removed was a photograph, 8 by 10, printed on matte paper, the kind of photo that came out of a military records file. It showed a woman in combat gear, face partially obscured by equipment, crouched over a casualty in what was clearly a forward operating environment. The dust and light in the image were particular in a way that meant somewhere very specific. He held it out. Lauren took it and looked at it for 3 seconds, then handed it back. "That's a classified deployment photo," she said. "It was classified," Ashworth said. "It was declassified last month as part of a broader records release." He paused. "Your name is on the operational record it came from. Your full name, your rank, your unit designator, your decorations." Lauren was very still. "I understand," she said. "The records are public now. Anyone with access to the federal database can pull them." His voice was even, but there was something careful underneath it. "I'm not here to make that harder for you, but I needed you to hear it from me, and I needed to bring the documentation with me so you understand the scope." He removed a second sheet, a formal document with multiple signatures and a seal that Lauren did not look at for long. She didn't need to. She knew what it was. "There's also the matter of a commendation that was processed 3 years ago and never formally presented," Ashworth said. "Command wants to correct that." Sylvia Raines had moved. Lauren registered it in her peripheral vision. Sylvia was walking toward them now, slowly, with the particular posture of an administrator who had decided to intervene in something they didn't understand yet. "Excuse me," Sylvia said in her administrative voice, which was 2 registers lower than her regular voice and meant to convey authority. "This is a clinical floor. Whatever this is, Director Raines," Lauren said it without raising her voice or turning toward her. "This isn't a moment where you should speak." The silence that followed that sentence was a different quality than the silence that had existed before it. Sylvia stopped walking. Her mouth closed. She looked at Lauren, really looked, possibly for the first time, and something crossed her face that was hard to name. Not embarrassment, not exactly. More like the particular vertigo of realizing you have been reading a situation completely wrong for a very long time and cannot pinpoint the moment it started. Ashworth watched the exchange without expression. Then he looked back at Lauren and said, "There are 3 vehicles outside. Command authorization for whatever you need from us. Space, time, personnel. Sergeant stays with you until you decide otherwise." He paused. "And Lieutenant, I haven't been a lieutenant in 4 years, Colonel." "No," he said, "but you haven't stopped being who you are. That's kind of why we're here." Outside the hospital's glass front wall, The last of the afternoon light was hitting the black vehicles in the parking lot, and the personnel near them had adopted the particular stillness of people who are waiting for something and know how to wait. 3 nurses who had come to the window of the break room were standing there with coffee cups they'd forgotten to drink, watching. The dog hadn't moved from Lauren's side. Lauren looked at the document folder in Ashworth's hand. She looked at the hallway around her, the patients in rooms who needed their medications, the IV bag she'd set down on top of the cart, Marco in 614, who would be going home tomorrow if the night shift caught everything she was going to note in her handoff. Then she looked at Sylvia Raines, who was still standing 6 feet away with an expression that was doing a lot of different things at once. "I need to finish my rounds first," Lauren said. Ashworth nodded. "We'll be here." She picked up the IV bag from the cart. She checked the patient label against the chart in her hand. Then she walked to the door of 612, knocked twice the way she always did, and went in. Behind her, in the hallway, no one moved for a long time. She finished 612 in 11 minutes. Mr. Alderman, 62, post-cholecystectomy, running a temperature of 99.8 that had been sitting in his chart since morning like a note nobody wanted to read aloud. Lauren checked his incision site, adjusted his fluid rate, asked him 3 questions that sounded like small talk and were not, and made 3 entries in his chart that the night physician would need to act on. He asked her if everything was okay because she seemed distracted. "I'm fine," she said. "How's the pain level?" 4, maybe. I'm going to put in for a dosage adjustment. Someone will be in within the hour." She moved to 614 next. Marco was sitting up in bed watching something on his phone with the volume low, the way people watch things when they're trying not to seem like they're watching things. He looked up when she came in. "You okay?" he asked. "Checking on you," she said. "That's my line." "There's a bunch of soldiers in the hallway." "I know. They with you?" Lauren hung his new IV bag and checked the flow rate. "Get some sleep tonight, Marco. Your parents are coming at 9 tomorrow, yes?" "Yeah." "Good." She marked the chart, did not answer the question, and walked back out. The hallway had not returned to normal. It had settled into a different state. The surface motions of a working ward, nurses moving, a cart being rolled, a call button light blinking above a door. But underneath that, everything was held. Ashworth was standing near the nurses' station with the 2 officers from his team, not speaking, not demanding attention. He had the posture of a man who had waited in significantly worse places than a hospital corridor and was not inconvenienced by this one. Sargent had followed Lauren into 614 and back out again. Nobody had stopped him. Lauren suspected nobody had tried. Priya intercepted Lauren before she reached the next room, voice dropped low, eyes doing something complicated. "Lauren, who are those people?" "Military." "I can see that. Why are they here?" Lauren glanced at her. Priya was a good nurse. She was also 26 and had been at Harrowfield for 8 months and had spent most of that time trying to figure out how the floor worked without getting crushed by it. She deserved a straight answer. She was also going to have to wait for one. "I'll explain what I can explain when I can explain it," Lauren said. "Right now I need you to cover 608 for me. Mrs. Tran is due for her 4 o'clock vitals and I'm running behind." Priya opened her mouth, closed it, nodded. "Okay." Lauren got through the rest of her rounds in 40 minutes. Not fast. She didn't do anything fast that was supposed to be done carefully, but efficiently in the way that someone works when they have learned to compress attention rather than divide it, to be completely present in each room and then completely gone from it when it was done. She wrote her handoff notes at the station while Ashworth stood 8 feet away and said nothing. The 2 officers with him were doing that particular military thing where you stand without fidgeting, which always looked to civilians like stoicism, but was actually just training. Sylvia Raines had gone into her office and closed the door. Through the narrow window beside the door, Lauren could see her on the phone. At 5:58, Lauren capped her pen, closed the chart, and looked up. "All right," she said. Ashworth straightened slightly. "There's a conference room on the ground floor your administrator arranged." "Of course she did," Lauren said, and something about the way she said it was so dry and unvarnished that Priya, who was close enough to hear it, almost laughed and caught herself. They took the elevator down. Lauren, Ashworth, the 2 officers, and Sargent, who rode in the elevator like he had done it many times, which he had. The elevator was too small for all of them, and nobody said anything during the descent. The conference room on the ground floor was used for board presentations and administrative meetings and smelled like the particular combination of dry erase marker and recycled air that all such rooms share, regardless of the building. Someone had brought in a second chair. The table was long enough for 8, and Ashworth sat at one side and Lauren sat at the other, and the two officers took positions near the door. Ashworth put the folder on the table between them. "I'm going to go through this in order," he said. "Go ahead." He opened the folder. The first document was the declassification notice, a 2-page federal record with a case number in the top right corner and a series of signatures at the bottom, the last one dated 6 weeks ago. He turned it to face her. She read it the way she read everything, completely and without visible reaction. "The release covers operational records from 2 deployment cycles," Ashworth said. "Yours and 3 others from the same task force rotation. It was part of a broader declassification order, several hundred records, most of them administrative. Yours were included because the commendation documentation needed to be in the public record to process the presentation. The commendation I told Command I didn't want presented." "Which Command noted," Ashworth said, "and which became irrelevant when the legal team determined it needed to be formally presented to close the record. It was either a ceremony or a piece of paper mailed to whatever address we had on file. That address hasn't been mine for 3 years. Which is partly why I'm here, instead of an envelope." Lauren looked at the second document he placed on the table. It was on heavier stock than the first, cream-colored formal header, the kind of document that had weight to it beyond the paper. She didn't pick it up. "What does the public record say specifically?" she asked. Ashworth was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, organizing. "It says that during a fire support mission in a designated combat zone, the tactical medical unit attached to the task force came under direct enemy contact while simultaneously managing 6 critical casualties from a vehicle ambush. The ranking medical officer was incapacitated in the first minutes of the engagement." He paused. "It says that a lieutenant designated as secondary medical lead assumed command of the casualty collection point, continued treating casualties under fire for 2 hours and 17 minutes, directed the CASEVAC of all 6 personnel despite 2 of them being classified expectant, and sustained a fragmentation injury during the final sequence that she did not report until after the last patient was loaded." The room was very quiet. "It says both expectant patients survived," he said. Lauren's jaw was set. "I know what happened." "I know you do. I was 300 meters away when it happened." He held her gaze. "I've never forgotten what you did that day. Nobody who was there has." She looked at the commendation document again, then away. "What's the practical implication of the records being public?" "Anyone who searches your name in the federal database now gets the operational record. Your rank at separation, your unit, the commendation citation, all of it." He leaned back slightly. "It was going to come out eventually. I wanted you to have time to decide how to handle it rather than having someone else decide for you." Lauren sat with that for a moment. Outside the conference room door, she could hear the ambient hospital, the distant PA system, a cart, someone's shoes. Normal sounds. She had spent 4 years building a life inside those sounds, a deliberately ordinary life, in a deliberately ordinary role, in a hospital that did not ask her to be anything other than a nurse who showed up on time and did the work. She had built it that way on purpose. "Thank you for coming in person," she said finally. It was not a warm thing exactly. It was an accurate thing. "There's one more item," Ashworth said. He removed a third document from the folder. This one was different from the others. Not a formal record, not a commendation. It was a printed briefing sheet, the kind that got circulated before a situation update. He didn't turn it to face her yet. "The task force that Sargent is assigned to is going through a realignment," he said. "New operational mandate, expanded scope, new leadership structure. Part of that is a civilian liaison program, embedding experienced personnel in medical institutions that have trauma infrastructure." He set the paper down without opening it fully. "Your name came up." Lauren looked at him. "I'm not here to recruit you," he said quickly. "I mean that. This isn't why I came. I came because of the records and the commendation, and because Sargent needed to be somewhere stable. and the handler situation was becoming a genuine problem for the unit. He glanced at the dog, who was sitting beside Lauren's chair with the calm of an animal who had decided a question had been settled. "But I'd be not doing my job if I didn't mention that the program exists and that your name came up in the context of it." Lauren said nothing for a long moment. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." She picked up the commendation document and read it properly this time, all the way through. Her face did not do much while she read it. When she finished, she set it down and aligned it with the edge of the table. "I need to get back upstairs," she said. "My handoff is at 6. They stood at the same moment. "One question," Ashworth said, off record. She looked at him. "Did you know when you took the position here that it was going to be like this? The treatment, the day-to-day?" Lauren considered the question the way she considered most questions, without rushing it. "I knew it was going to be a regular hospital with regular hospital problems," she said. "I didn't know it was going to be this specific set of them, but I wasn't surprised. You could have gone anywhere. Johns Hopkins would have taken you, Walter Reed, any major trauma center." "I know." "Why here?" She looked at him for a moment. "Because the patients here don't have anywhere else," she said. "Same reason as always, Colonel." He nodded once. Something in his expression settled. She walked out of the conference room with Sergeant at her heel. The handoff took 35 minutes, which was longer than usual because the night charge had questions about 2 of Lauren's patients, and because Priya, in covering 608 during Lauren's time downstairs, had noticed something in Mrs. Tran's presentation that Lauren had half-flagged in the chart and needed to talk through properly. They stood at the station and went through it the way 2 people go through something when they are both taking it seriously and not performing seriousness for each other's benefit. By the time Lauren got her jacket from her locker, it was 6:40. The parking lot was dark, the mountain cold coming off the ranges in that particular way it did in Dunmore in late autumn, the kind of cold that gets into the joints before you realize you're standing in it. 2 of the military vehicles were still there. One had left. Sergeant walked out beside her through the entrance doors and stopped on the sidewalk, looking up at her. "You can't come home with me," she told him. He looked at her with the specific expression of a German shepherd who has decided that a statement is not a fact. The corporal, the young one from earlier, who had been pulled through the hallway by a leash, materialized from near one of the vehicles, looking relieved that someone was addressing the situation. "Ma'am, he's been refusing to go in the vehicle." "Since when?" "Since you went into the conference room." Lauren crouched down in front of the dog. He was about 4 years old. She could see it in the face, the slight broadening around the muzzle, the way he carried his weight. He'd been a working dog for most of that. She put both hands on either side of his head. "You have a job," she said, quietly and directly, the way you talk to a working animal rather than a pet. "You don't get to stop doing it because you found someone familiar. That's not how this works." Sergeant regarded her. "I'll see you again," she said. "But you have to go." He held for another moment. Then he stood, turned, and walked to the vehicle with the corporal without being led. The corporal looked at Lauren with an expression that was half impressed and half disturbed, like he had just witnessed something he didn't have a framework for. Lauren stood up and walked to her car. She drove home on the highway that cut along the western edge of Dunmore, the mountains to her left going dark against a sky that was still faintly red at the horizon. She had a 12-minute commute on a normal day. She drove it without music, which was usual. She drove without thinking about the commendation document or the declassified records or what Sylvia Raines had been doing in her office on the phone at 5:40 in the afternoon. She did think about the 2 patients Ashworth had mentioned were classified expectant. She thought about them the way she always thought about them, which was not with pride or with weight, exactly, but with a kind of flat, factual awareness of what that day had required and what she had been willing to do to meet that requirement. Expectant meant expected to die. It meant you triaged past them to the patients you could save. She had not triaged past them. She had made a clinical decision in real time that the word expectant was wrong and worked from there. Both of them were alive. She knew because she had checked 3 times in the 2 years after she separated, and then she had stopped checking because checking was a way of staying inside something she had decided to leave. She got home. Small house, rented, on a side street that was quiet in the winter and quieter in the summer because the neighbors were older and kept their noise inside. She ate leftover rice and something from a container in the refrigerator that she had made on Sunday and was not going to identify more specifically than that. She took a shower. She sat on the edge of her bed with her phone in her hand and looked at the notification count without opening any of them. She went to sleep at 9:15 to go. The next morning at Harrowfield was different in the way that a room is different after furniture has been moved, even if you cannot immediately identify what moved. Lauren clocked in at 5:53. She went to the break room. She made coffee from the fresh pot rather than the one that had been sitting. She was reading the night chart notes when Priya came in and sat down across from her without being invited, which Priya did not usually do. "So," Priya said. "Good morning. People are talking. People always talk." "Lauren." Priya said her name with a weight to it. "I've been here 8 months. I have seen Director Rains make 3 nurses cry. I have seen her write up a tech for leaving a cart in the wrong position. I have seen her tell a physician, an attending physician, that his documentation was substandard in front of his patient's family." She paused. "I have never seen her go into her office and close the door and stay there." Lauren drank her coffee. "She was on the phone for 40 minutes, Priya said, after the military people arrived. 40 minutes. How do you know it was 40 minutes? Because I was watching." Lauren looked at her. "You should be careful about making it obvious when you're watching people. I'm 26, not 12. I know how to be discreet." Priya leaned forward slightly. "What happened down there in the conference room?" "Administrative matter. The kind of administrative matter that comes with 3 vehicles and a military dog?" "Priya, I'm not trying to pry. I'm asking because, look, something shifted yesterday. I don't know what it is, but the air is different and everyone can feel it and nobody knows what they're supposed to do with that." She sat back. "I thought you'd want to know." Lauren set her cup down. "Thank you. That's actually useful. Is it going to be okay? For you, I mean, whatever is happening?" Lauren considered the question with the same brief seriousness she gave everything. "It's going to be what it is," she said, which isn't the same thing as not okay. Priya seemed to accept that with a slightly reluctant satisfaction and left to start her own shift. Lauren went upstairs. The morning on 6C had its own texture. Mr. Alderman's fever had climbed overnight. The night physician had made the adjustment Lauren had recommended, and the temperature was now 100.1, which was the wrong direction. She reviewed the note, reviewed the blood panel that had been drawn at 2 in the morning, and put in a call to the attending before she'd been on the floor 20 minutes. Marco had gone home. His bed was already being turned for the next admission, which was a 58-year-old woman coming up from the ED after a hypertensive crisis. Lauren got the room ready herself because the tech was running behind. At 8:40, the hospital's overhead PA said Director Rains was requested at the administrator's office. And the way it said it, the flat repetition of the request rather than the usual one-time page, meant it was not a request. 2 nurses at the station made eye contact with each other. Lauren did not look up from the chart she was reading. At 9:10, she was in the hall outside 616 when she heard footsteps behind her that she recognized and turned to find Sylvia Rains walking toward her with an expression that Lauren had never seen on her face before. Not aggressive, not performing. Something underneath the surface of her features had been reorganized while she'd been in the administrator's office, and what was left was harder to read than any of her previous expressions because it was unmanaged. "Lauren," her voice was different too, lower, less projected. I wanted to speak with you. I'm in the middle of a med pass." "I know. I'll be quick." Sylvia stopped 2 feet away, which was closer than she usually stood, and for a moment she looked at the wall beside Lauren rather than at her. "I made some calls last night, after everything. I spoke with people at the administrative office, and I looked into some things, and I understand now that there are aspects of the situation that I wasn't." She stopped. Started again. "The documentation issues I cited yesterday. I'm withdrawing the formal notation from your file." Lauren waited. "I may have been..." Some of my assessments of your performance may not have been. Sylvia's jaw tightened once. It looked like the tightening of someone swallowing something that does not go down easily. I'm going to review the personnel file. I appreciate that, Lauren said. I wanted you to know. I do know. Thank you. Sylvia looked at her then, directly, in a way that was uncomfortable and probably knew it was uncomfortable. I didn't know who you were. Lauren held her gaze. That's the thing, Director. You didn't need to know who I was. I was a nurse doing her job. That should have been enough. Sylvia Raines had been in hospital administration for 14 years. She had been in 3 institutions before this one. She had managed budgets and staffing crises and board presentations, and the particular politics of a medical environment that most people on the outside did not fully understand. She was not a stupid woman. She was not a cruel one, exactly. She was a woman who had learned to use authority as a tool and had stopped noticing at some point that the people on the receiving end of it were people. She heard what Lauren said. Something in her face showed it. She turned and walked back toward her office without another word. Lauren stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds, watching her go. Then she turned back to room 616 and knocked twice. She was at the station at 11:40, entering chart notes, when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She looked at it, looked at the screen, and stepped into the alcove beside the supply room to answer it. Mercer, she said. Lauren. The voice was male, older, and she did not recognize it immediately. This is Richard Harwell. I'm the chief executive of Harrowfield Regional. She had never spoken with the chief executive of the hospital. She had seen him twice, once at an all-staff meeting in her first month, once in the elevator when he had not looked at her. Mr. Harwell, she said, I understand you've been contacted by military personnel regarding a matter that involves your service record. His tone was careful in the way tones get careful when someone is speaking with awareness of how the words might be documented. I want you to know that the hospital takes these matters seriously. There will be a review of your personnel file and any flagged items in your documentation record. Director Raines mentioned the withdrawal of the notation. Yes, and there are additional items I want to look at personally. A pause. I also want to say that the hospital values your contributions to this floor. I've reviewed some of the patient outcomes data for 6C, and your involvement it's notable. Lauren said nothing. I'd like to schedule a meeting, this week if possible. I'm available Friday. Friday works. I'll have my assistant confirm. Another pause, shorter this time. Thank you, Lauren. She put the phone in her pocket and went back to the station and sat down. Priya was 2 seats away, pretending to look at a chart. Chief Executive, Lauren said flatly, not looking up. I wasn't listening, Priya said. You absolutely were. I absolutely was, Priya confirmed. Are you okay? Lauren looked at the chart in front of her. Mr. Alderman's temperature was still climbing. The attending hadn't called back. She had 2 other patients overdue for reassessment and a medication reconciliation to finish before the noon pharmaceutical round. Yes, she said, go check on 608. Priya went. Lauren went back to work. She did not think about Richard Harwell or Sylvia Raines or Ashworth or the folder of documents sitting in the conference room downstairs, which she had left there on purpose and which she suspected was still there. She thought about Mr. Alderman's fever and what it might mean and what she was going to do about it if the attending didn't call back in the next 30 minutes. The attending didn't call back in the next 30 minutes. At 12:22, she made a second call, left a second message, and then went to the floor's senior physician, Dr. Reyes, internal medicine, who was covering that afternoon and had the manner of someone who had learned patience by surviving a long time in institutions that rewarded impatience, and told him directly what she was seeing in Mr. Alderman's presentation and what she thought it indicated. Dr. Reyes listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions. He ordered a second panel and a change in antibiotics and went to see the patient himself. 45 minutes later, the panel came back. Early onset sepsis. Caught it. Lauren updated the chart and moved to the next room. At 2:15 in the afternoon, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text, which was unusual, from a number she did not have saved. It was short. It said, records cleared federal database as of this morning. Full public index. Several journalists have already pulled the file. Thought you should have a heads up. Ah. She read it twice. She put the phone away. She stood in the hallway of Ward 6C, between the room where Mr. Alderman was now getting the right antibiotic at the right rate, and the room where the woman from the hypertensive crisis was sleeping more steadily than she had been an hour ago, and she understood with a complete and quiet clarity that the part of her life she had spent building something ordinary was finished. Not because she had failed to build it, because something had come looking for it. She was still standing there, thinking this through, when the call came through from the ED, not a page, not a phone call to the nurse's station, a direct overhead announcement, flat-voiced and fast, the kind that the hospital reserved for mass casualty events. All available trauma and critical care personnel to the emergency department. All available trauma and critical care personnel to the emergency department. Multiple vehicle incident, highway inbound, estimate 20-plus casualties, ETA 11 minutes. The hallway changed, running feet from two directions, a crash cart being pulled from its alcove. Someone's voice, sharp and too loud, from the station. Lauren stood very still for exactly 1 second. Then she was already moving. The stairwell was faster than the elevator, and Lauren took it at a pace that was not quite running. Controlled descent, hand on the rail at each landing, the kind of movement that looked unhurried from a distance and covered ground fast. She hit the ground floor and pushed through the door into the main corridor and immediately felt the change in the building's pressure. Hospitals have a rhythm, a baseline hum that you stop noticing after your first few months, and when something catastrophic is incoming, that rhythm breaks in a specific way. Not louder exactly, but denser. More bodies moving in the same direction, more voices overlapping without completing sentences. The ED was at the south end of the building. Lauren had been there twice in 4 years, both times to accompany a patient being transferred down, never to work it. As she came through the double doors, she ran a rapid count. 12 staff visible, 4 of them physicians. The rest a mix of nurses and techs. 2 trauma bays already prepped. A third being set up by a tech who was moving fast, but not fast enough. The charge nurse was a large man named Darnell, who Lauren knew by sight, but had never worked a shift with. He was at the center of the room, with a radio in his hand and the expression of someone doing math in their head that wasn't adding up the way he wanted. "Highway Patrol says 23 confirmed," someone called from near the radio desk. "What's our trauma bay count?" Darnell said. 4 operational. Dr. Keys wants the overflow protocol activated." "Dr. Keys isn't here yet." Darnell looked around the room, and his gaze landed on Lauren with a brief confusion. 6C? "Lauren Mercer," she said. "I'm combat-trained, TCCC qualified. Tell me where you need me." Darnell looked at her for 1 second. The weighing kind of second that happens when someone decides whether to ask questions or use the resource they've been handed. He chose right. "Bay 3 isn't ready. Get it ready." She was already moving toward it. The tech doing the setup, a young woman, maybe 22, who was clearly running on adrenaline and muscle memory with the ratio skewed toward adrenaline, was reaching for the supply card in the wrong order, setting up for a standard presentation rather than multi-trauma. "Stop," Lauren said. Not harsh, specific. "Swap the order. Airway kit first, then vascular access, then chest. If they're coming off a highway accident, you're going to need the thoracic tray before the standard IV setup." The tech blinked. You're doing good. Just change the order. Fast." The tech changed the order. Lauren checked the suction unit, checked the oxygen connection at the wall, looked at the defibrillator and verified it was charged, and ran her eyes over the bay in the systematic pattern she had been using in CCP setups since a forward base in conditions this woman had never seen. 17 seconds. Done. She heard the ambulances before anyone announced them. Then Darnell's radio. First unit 2 minutes out. GSW to the thorax. Unconscious. BP 60 over palp. Second unit directly behind. Bilateral femur fractures. Responsive. Third unit 4 minutes. Pediatric. Head trauma. "Pediatric," Darnell said it in a way that meant the room needed to hear it and prepare for what that meant emotionally as well as clinically. "Where's your pediatric attending?" Lauren asked him. "On his way in. He was off today." "Who's covering until he arrives?" Darnell didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. Lauren turned to the nearest physician, a woman in her late 30s she didn't know, Dr. something, the name on the badge too far to read. "Are you comfortable with pediatric head trauma presentation?" The woman looked at her with an expression that mixed offense at being asked and honest uncertainty about the answer. "I've managed it." "Good. I'm going to need you in Bay 2 when the child comes in, and I need you to be prepared to hold that bay until your pediatric attending arrives." Lauren didn't soften it or surround it with qualifiers. "Can you do that?" "Yes," the physician said, after a beat that was a half-second too long, but was still a yes. The first ambulance bay doors opened. The patient from the first unit was a man in his late 40s, construction clothing, a penetrating chest injury from road debris during the initial impact, a piece of metal guardrail that had come through the windshield. He was unconscious when they rolled him in. BP was now 54 over nothing meaningful. The paramedics were running a fluid bolus that was buying time in small increments. Lauren moved to the head of the bay as they transferred him to the table. Dr. Reyes, who had come down from internal medicine, was in the doorway. He was not an ED physician. He knew it and was standing at the threshold of his own competence with the honesty of a person who understood where that threshold was. "I can assist," he said. "Take airway," Lauren said. "I'll manage the chest." "Doctor?" She looked at the badge of the physician who had come into Bay 1 with the patient. "Morales? Vascular access, both arms, large bore now." Morales was in his early 40s and had the look of an emergency physician who was used to being the one giving orders. He looked at her. Then he looked at the patient. Then he put gloves on and reached for the IV catheter. Lauren had the chest exposed in under 10 seconds. The wound was left lateral, third intercostal space, and there was a tension pneumothorax building. She could hear it in the absent breath sounds on the left side, see it in the tracheal deviation that was subtle, but there if you knew what you were looking for. "Needle decompression," she said to the tech. 14 gauge, second intercostal, midclavicular line. "Give me the kit." "Shouldn't we wait for—" "He has 2 minutes before that tension kills him." "Kit. Now." The kit appeared. She did it clean, angle, insertion, the audible hiss of released pressure that told her she was right, and that being right was the difference between this man dying in Bay 1 and not. She held the needle steady while Reyes secured airway above and Morales got his second line. The patient's BP began to climb. Not fast. Not enough yet. But the direction changed. "We need surgery," she said. "OR is notifying," Darnell called from the corridor. "How long?" 8 minutes minimum." "He doesn't have 8 minutes. Where's your chief of surgery?" "In the building. Somewhere." "Find him," Lauren said. Not a call. Someone physically goes and finds him and puts him in this bay." The tech broke off and went. The second ambulance patient was already in Bay 2. Bilateral femur fractures, a 40-year-old woman, conscious and in the kind of pain that compresses everything down to a single animal urgency. She was gripping the side rail and not screaming because she'd moved past the screaming register into something lower and more sustained. "You're in the hospital," Lauren said, stepping past her bay on her way to something. She caught the woman's eyes for 1 full second. "We have you. Stay with us." The woman's grip on the rail tightened, but she looked at Lauren instead of the ceiling, which was something. The third unit arrived with the child. 7 years old, male, head trauma from impact with the vehicle's interior during a rollover. He was conscious but altered. GCS of 11, right pupil sluggish, the presentation that sat right on the edge between watchful management and surgical emergency. Dr. Vasquez, the ED physician Lauren had spoken to earlier, was in Bay 2 with gloves on when they brought him in. Lauren stepped to the doorway. "Pupils?" she asked. "Right is slow," Vasquez said. "Left is reactive." "He needs a CT head immediately. Don't wait for the pediatric attending. If you're seeing early herniation signs, that window is short." "I know the window." "Then move him." Something in Vasquez's expression flickered. Not anger, something more honest than anger, which was the particular sensation of a person who had been told something they already knew by someone who had no formal authority over them, and who was trying to figure out whether to be offended by it or grateful for the backup. She chose neither and just turned back to the patient. Lauren moved. "All right." The next 40 minutes were the kind of time that doesn't exist inside normal chronology. They existed as a sequence of clinical events with connective tissue stripped away. Action, response, action, the body's failures and the tools available to address them, and the judgment calls made in the space between them that did not allow for review. 7 patients came through the ED in that first wave. 3 critical, 2 serious, 2 that could wait but weren't going to stop occupying space and personnel. Lauren moved between bays as the pressure shifted, not because anyone had told her to, but because she could read a room the way a conductor reads an orchestra, and she could see where it was about to fall apart before it fell apart. The surgeon arrived in bay 19 minutes after she had sent the tech to find him. His name was Dr. Halverson, a compact man in his mid-50s with the calm of someone who had been in operating rooms for a long time and had stopped being impressed by urgency because urgency was simply the baseline. He looked at the patient, looked at Lauren's decompression, looked at the monitor. "Good call on the tension," he said. "We need to move him now. OR2 is ready." He glanced at her. "You're 6C?" "Yes." "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. She didn't answer it. "Come upstairs with him," Halverson said. "I want a scrub who's seen a chest that's been through something." "I can't leave the ED." He looked at the room. He looked back at her. He made a decision the way surgeons make decisions. Fast, final, without advertising the process. "Fair, sir," he said. He stepped to the head of the gurney and started moving. They took the man to surgery, and Lauren did not go with him, and she did not find out until 2 hours later that he made it. The second wave of units arrived at 14 minutes past the first announcement. 6 more. These from the secondary impact that had occurred on the on-ramp when traffic had stacked up behind the original crash site. 2 drivers had been extracted from vehicles that had collided with the initial wreckage while it was still on the highway. Darnell had expanded the triage zone to the ambulance bay itself, which was the right call and was 2 minutes late, which was also true, and both things existed simultaneously without canceling each other out. Lauren was at the triage point when the second wave arrived. She was doing primary surveys in the sequence she had been trained to do them: airway, breathing, circulation, disability, exposure, moving person to person with the stethoscope from a supply cart and a pen light that she had pocketed at some point without consciously deciding to and was now using to check pupils. "This one needs a bay," she said about the third patient. "Seatbelt sign, abdomen rigid, I want ultrasound." "We're out of bays," someone said. "Then make one." She looked at Darnell. "The family waiting area at the end of the corridor. Pull the chairs, put a gurney in there. You have space." Darnell was on it before she finished the sentence. Behind her, she heard a voice she recognized. "Lauren." Ashworth. She turned and he was there, in the ambulance bay, in uniform, and behind him were 2 of the tactical medics from his unit in full kit minus weapons, which they had left in the vehicle because they were inside a hospital. "I heard the announcement," he said. "My guys are TCCC qualified and they have their kits. Tell me where." She looked at him for 1 second. "Triage overflow, ambulance bay, Darnell's coordinating." She turned to the medics. "Listen to Darnell like he's your CO. Go." They went. What she didn't see, because she was already moving back inside, was Ashworth watching her work, watching the way the room had reorganized itself around her without anyone formally announcing that it had, and the expression on his face that was not surprise but was something older and more complicated than that. Inside, the ED had stabilized into the kind of organized intensity that is different from chaos in the way that a river is different from a flood. Same volume, different direction. People were moving with purpose now rather than velocity. The pediatric patient was in CT. The bilateral femur case was in surgery prep. The wave of moderate severity patients was being managed in the expanded overflow zone. Lauren was in Bay 1, now cleared and reset for the next critical, when she heard the argument. It was coming from the corridor just outside the ED entrance, and it was Sylvia Raines's voice. And Sylvia's voice, when she was performing authority in front of people, was something Lauren could identify from a distance. "These personnel are not authorized to operate within this facility. I don't care what—" "Ma'am." Ashworth's voice, very level. My medics are assisting in an active mass casualty event under the direct request of your charge nurse. The patients they are currently treating have been in contact with them for 6 minutes. If you remove them right now, you will be directly responsible for what happens to those patients. I need to see authorization. The only authorization that matters right now is that there are people outside who need care. We have qualified personnel. They are providing it. Lauren stepped into the corridor. Both Ashworth and Sylvia turned to look at her simultaneously, which she registered and did not react to. Director Rains, she said. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. There are 23 patients inbound from a mass casualty incident. 2 of your surgical bays are currently active. You are 4 physicians below optimal staffing for this volume. Colonel Ashworth's medics have been operating in the ambulance bay under authorization from your charge nurse, and they are currently the reason 3 of those patients are stable. She held Sylvia's gaze. If you pull them, I will document what happens next, and so will every other person in this building. Sylvia's mouth was open slightly, not because she was about to speak, because something had run out of it. The particular automated confidence that had carried her through 14 years in hospital administration and which now seemed to be having trouble returning. I need to call Mr. Harwell, she said. Call him, Lauren said. I'll be in Bay 2. She walked back inside. Behind her, she heard nothing for a moment. Then she heard Sylvia's heels going the other direction. Then she heard Ashworth say something low and brief to someone near him, and then quiet. Set. At the 3-hour mark, the acute phase was over. 21 of the 23 patients had been triaged, treated, and either admitted or stabilized. 1 had gone directly to surgery. 1, the man from Bay 1, the chest wound, was in the ICU and breathing with a chest tube and a blood pressure that was still fragile but present. 1 patient, a 68-year-old woman brought in from the second wave with blunt cardiac trauma, had arrested in the ambulance bay at 47 minutes into the incident. Ashworth's medic, a young sergeant named Wills, had run a CLS for 19 minutes. She had not come back. Wills was sitting outside on the ambulance bay curb now, gloves still on, looking at the ground. Lauren brought him a cup of water and set it beside him without saying anything. He looked at it, looked up at her. I did everything right, he said. Not defensive, not asking for validation, just stating it, because sometimes you needed to say it out loud to make it real. You did, she said. It still didn't work. It doesn't always work. She sat on the concrete beside him, which was not something she would have done on any normal shift for any normal reason. But normal had been over for 2 days now, and besides, this kid needed someone to sit next to him. That's not on you. He drank some of the water. You worked with the colonel for a long time? He asked. Different unit. We overlapped on task force rotations. He talks about the medical team from that period, like... Will stopped. I don't know, like they were different from other medics. Every unit thinks that about their own people, Lauren said. He specifically talks about one of them, Will said. Lauren stood up. Drink the rest of that, then go check in with your CO. She walked back inside. Darnell was at the main station doing the documentation that followed a mass casualty event, which was a different kind of exhausting than the event itself. He looked up when she came in. Thank you, he said. It was simple and direct, and she could tell he didn't say it to people easily. You ran it well, she said. I ran it adequately. He shook his head slightly. You saw 3 things before I did, every time. You were managing the whole room. I was managing individual bays, different visibility. Stop being gracious about it, Mercer. It's making me uncomfortable. She almost smiled. I need to go back to 6C and do my handoff notes. Yeah, he paused. You're wasted up there, you know. She did not answer that, and he didn't need her to. And she left. It was almost 7 in the evening when she got back to the 6th floor. The day shift had officially ended 90 minutes ago. The night charge had the floor. 2 of Lauren's patients had been managed by the float nurse during the MCY response, and the handoff notes were incomplete in ways that needed correction. She sat at the station and worked through them. Priya was still there, which was not required of her. She had stayed because she had been covering the floor during the response, and because she was the kind of person who did not leave things half-finished. They worked side by side in silence for a while. The pediatric patient, Priya said eventually, CT showed no herniation. He's being admitted for observation. Priya let out a breath. Bay 1 chest patient is in the ICU, Lauren said. Breathing. Chest tube is holding. Prognosis is still pending. And the woman who... No. Priya went quiet for a moment. 68 is not old enough. No, it isn't. They worked. At 7:40, Lauren's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number, text. Harwell has called an emergency board session. Tomorrow, 900. You're being requested to attend. She stared at that for long enough that Priya noticed. What is it? Lauren set the phone down. Hospital board meeting tomorrow morning. That's... Priya paused. Is that about you? Partly. What does that mean for you? Lauren thought about it. She thought about the 4 years on this floor and the incident reports filed in the wrong format and the notation in her personnel file that was being reviewed, and the way Sylvia Raines' voice had sounded different this morning, and the way Darnell had said you're wasted up there, and the way Ashworth had looked at her in the ambulance bay, and the declassified record that was now in a public federal database with her full name on it and a citation that described 2 hours and 17 minutes of her life that she had never told anyone about. I don't know yet, she said honestly. She finished her notes. She picked up her jacket. She was halfway to the elevator when she heard running, actual running, not the quick walk that hospital staff used even in emergencies, but the flat-out sprint of someone who had abandoned professional composure completely. It was Darnell. He was on his radio and running toward the stairwell at the same time, and as he passed the nursing station, he shouted 2 words that landed in the corridor like something physical. Bay 1. Lauren turned. Chest tube patient? Darnell didn't finish the sentence. He hit the stairwell door. Lauren was 6 steps behind him. She took the stairs in the dark. The stairwell was dark at the landing between floors 2 and 3 because the motion sensor light had been written up twice in the maintenance log and twice not fixed, and Lauren hit it at speed and kept going purely by feel, hand on the rail, counting steps, the particular muscle memory of moving fast in low light that you either had or you didn't. She came through the door into the ICU corridor 4 seconds behind Darnell. Bay 1 was at the far end, and she could already hear the monitor alarm from the corridor. Not the single-tone pulse alarm, but the compound alarm, the layered sound that meant multiple parameters failing simultaneously. Through the glass walls, she could see 2 nurses already in the room and a respiratory tech reaching for the ventilator panel, and the man on the bed, the chest wound, the guardrail injury, the one who had been breathing with a chest tube and a fragile BP 6 hours ago, was not breathing well now. She pushed through the door. What happened? She said to the nearest nurse, a woman named Torres she recognized from the ICU roster. Tube shifted, we think. Breath sounds went unequal 10 minutes ago. We called it in, and then his pressure dropped. When did the shift physician last assess? 40 minutes ago. Lauren was already at the bedside with the stethoscope from her jacket pocket. She had stopped going anywhere without it 2 days ago as a matter of reflex. And she had the earpieces in and the chest piece on the right lateral wall before Torres finished the sentence. Right side, present. Left side, absent again, or nearly, the thin ghost of air movement that meant the chest tube had either kinked, clotted, or migrated, and the tension was rebuilding. Where's the on-call surgeon? Paged, not responding yet. How long ago? 6 minutes. 6 minutes was 2 minutes past acceptable and 4 minutes past what this patient had. Lauren looked at the chest tube. It was intact externally, the insertion site looked clean, but the drainage chamber was not showing the respiratory variation it should, which meant the tube was either kinked inside the chest wall or had migrated out of position during transfer. I need the chest tube tray, she said, and I need someone to get the on-call surgeon on a physical phone, not a page. A person dials a number and stays on until someone answers. Darnell pointed at a tech, and the tech left at a run. Lauren repositioned, checking the tube insertion angle, and when she put light pressure on the external segment, she felt it. The subtle wrong resistance of a tube that had moved. Not much. Enough. His pressure, she said. 82/50 and falling, Torres said. She looked at Darnell. He looked at her. The calculation they were both running was the same one. The on-call surgeon was not here, the patient's pressure was dropping, and the margin between doing something and having done nothing was measured in minutes that were currently passing. "I'm going to reposition the tube," Lauren said. The room went briefly very still. "You're a floor nurse," Torres said, not accusatory, stating a fact that had clinical implications. "Yes," Lauren said, "and I've repositioned chest tubes in environments where there was no other option. That is what is true right now." She looked at Torres directly. "You can document that you objected. I'm telling you to document that I made the call and why." Torres looked at her for 1 second. 1 second in which she was doing the same calculation Lauren had done and was arriving at the same answer. "I'll document," she said, and reached for the tray. Lauren put gloves on. She worked with the particular economy of motion that comes not from training alone, but from having done something under circumstances where the consequences of doing it badly were immediate and visible. She found the migration point. The tube had pulled back 2 centimeters along the track, enough to compromise drainage, secured the position, checked the chamber, and watched the drainage resume its proper oscillation with the patient's breathing effort. 40 seconds. The monitor alarm didn't stop immediately. It took another 90 seconds for the pressure to begin the climb back, slowly, in the incremental way that meant the body was deciding whether to hold on, not the fast recovery that you saw in the movies and didn't often see in rooms like this one. Darnell let out a breath through his nose. The on-call surgeon arrived 9 minutes later. His name was Dr. Feynman, and he was in his late 40s and had clearly been somewhere between awake and asleep when his phone had rung, because his jacket was on over what looked like a pullover, and his hair had not been addressed. He came in fast, assessed the patient, looked at the drainage chamber, looked at the monitor. "Who repositioned?" he asked. "I did," Lauren said. He looked at her badge, looked at her face. Did the same calculation everyone had been doing for 2 days now, except from a different position. "BP is climbing." It started about 8 minutes ago. He examined the insertion site, checked the tube manually, ran his own set of breath sounds. "It's holding," he said. "Good position." He stepped back. "You're from 6C? "Yes." "And you repositioned a chest tube because he was going to die while we waited," she said. "I documented my reasoning." Feynman looked at her for a long moment, not angry, considering. "All right," he said. "I'm going to stay with him for the next hour. Torres, I want vitals every 10 minutes. He paused, still looking at Lauren. "Thank you." She stripped her gloves. "He should make it," she said. "The underlying repair is solid. He just needed the tube back where it belonged." She walked out. In the corridor outside the ICU, at 8:15 in the evening, the building was quiet in the way hospitals go quiet. Not empty, never empty, but settled into its overnight register, the lower traffic hum of a place operating at reduced staffing with reduced noise. Darnell was beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. "You know that's going to be in an incident report," he said. "I know." "The board meeting is tomorrow morning." "I know that too." He shook his head, not in disapproval, in something more complicated that might have been wonder, or might have been exhaustion, or might have been both. "Mercer, I have been doing this job for 17 years. I have seen nurses who were technically excellent. I have seen nurses who were good with people. I have very rarely seen someone who was both of those things, and also had whatever—" He stopped. "I don't have the word for it." "Necessity," she said. "I just do what's necessary." "That's not—" He stopped again. "Never mind. Go home." "I'm going." She took the elevator this time. She was tired in the specific way that a high-functioning day of emergency response produces. Not the ordinary end-of-shift tired, but the kind that sits deeper in the body, in the joints, and behind the eyes. The kind that comes from running your nervous system at sustained high output for hours. She knew this tired. She had felt it before in contexts where the stakes were considerably higher. She knew what it required, which was food, water, sleep, in that order, and no substitutions. She got to the lobby and Ashworth was there. He was sitting in one of the chairs near the entrance, jacket off, one arm resting on the chair back. Sargent was beside him, head on his knee. Both of them looked up when she came off the elevator. "The chest patient," Ashworth said. "Stable. Should hold." He nodded. Will's told me what you did in the bay, the decompression, the tube. Will should go to sleep. He's 23. He doesn't sleep after a loss. Ashworth looked at her. He said you sat with him outside. For a few minutes. That mattered to him. She sat down in the chair across from him because her feet had opinions about standing, and the lobby was empty except for a security guard at the far desk who was looking at his phone. Sargent lifted his head, looked at her, put his head back down. The board meeting tomorrow, she said. Harwell called me an hour ago, Ashworth said. He wants a formal statement from me regarding the military personnel in the building during the MCY. I told him I'd attend. What's the statement? That my medics operated under request from the charge nurse during an active mass casualty event, that their participation was clinically appropriate, and that the alternative was worse outcomes for several patients. He paused. I also told him I'd be presenting the formal commendation documentation in whatever context was most appropriate, and that the hospital might want to consider whether that context was the board meeting. Lauren looked at him. I gave you a heads up, he said. That's all I can do. I didn't ask for any of this, Colonel. I know. I want you to understand that. I didn't build any of this. I didn't. She stopped, and the stopping was the most honest thing about the sentence, because what she was actually saying was that she hadn't wanted to be seen, and she was being seen regardless. And there was a particular and specific frustration in that, which she had no clean way to articulate. I just wanted to do the job. I know, he said again. And unlike most people who said things twice, he actually meant both times. But the job you did today, Lauren, what happened in that ED, that's not something that gets to be private just because you'd prefer it that way. 21 people. You caught things that would have been missed. You made calls that held. She looked at the lobby ceiling. It was the same institutional tile as every ceiling in the building, and it had nothing useful to say. The chest tube report is going to be a problem, she said. Maybe. It's outside my scope. You saved his life. Those are separate issues legally. Ashworth tilted his head in the slight way that meant he was acknowledging a point without conceding it. Feynman already called the medical director, he said, before I came down here. I overheard Darnell on the radio. What did Feynman say? I only heard one side. A pause. The word he used was extraordinary. Lauren said nothing. Go home, Ashworth said. I'll see you at 9. She stood. Her feet had not changed their opinion, but she ignored them. Sargent stays with you tonight. He's already decided that, Ashworth said. He just hasn't admitted it yet. The dog didn't move. Sergeant, Lauren said. One ear went up. Go with the colonel. He stood, shook once, and moved to Ashworth's side with the particular dignity of a working dog who had made a decision and was not going to let anyone see how long it had taken. Lauren walked out into the cold. She was up at 5:30 because she did not sleep past 5:30 as a rule. Her body had been set to that alarm for so long the clock was irrelevant. She made coffee, ate a piece of toast, looked at the briefing sheet Ashworth had texted her the night before regarding the board meeting format, and read it once with the same focused attention she gave medical charts. 15 people on the board. Harwell as CE, Sylvia Raines in her capacity as Director of Nursing Operations, 3 department heads, 8 external board members. The agenda item listed was Review of Mass Casualty Incident Response and Personnel Deployment. Her name was in the secondary notation. She was there at 8:45. The conference room on the administrative floor was larger than the one on the ground floor. Longer table, better chairs, windows that looked out on the mountain range to the west. The board members were already filtering in when she arrived, and they looked at her the way people look at someone when they know that person is the reason the meeting was called, but are not yet certain how to categorize them. Harwell came to her before he sat down. He was taller than she had expected from seeing him in the elevator. Mid-60s, silver-haired, the composed affect of a man who had spent decades in rooms where decisions had consequences and had learned not to telegraph his responses before he'd finished computing them. Lauren, he said, thank you for coming. Of course, she said. I've read the incident reports from yesterday, both from the ED and from the ICU. She waited. I want to hear from you today, he said. Not just about the incident, about everything. He held her gaze for a moment. Is that all right? That's why I'm here, she said. He nodded and moved to his seat. Ashworth arrived at 8:58 with the two officers from his team, and behind them, a woman Lauren didn't recognize, civilian clothes, mid-40s, carrying a document case, who sat beside Ashworth without introduction. Sylvia Raines was already seated. She was in a chair 2 positions from Harwell's right, and she was in a suit rather than her usual work dress, which meant she had prepared differently for today. She did not look at Lauren when Lauren came in. She looked at the table in front of her, and she looked at it with the concentrated attention of someone who is reviewing their own calculations. Dr. Graham Finch was there too. He was sitting at the end of the table in a chair slightly removed from the main group, which was probably not deliberate but read as it. The meeting started at 9 on the 2nd. Harwell ran it with the efficiency of someone who knew what the meeting was actually about and was not going to let it become something else. He outlined the MCI response, the patient outcomes, the involvement of military personnel. He noted the chest tube incident and said the medical review was underway and would be handled through the appropriate channel. He said Lauren's name 3 times in the first 10 minutes of the meeting, each time in the context of a clinical decision that had been made correctly. Sylvia's jaw was set. Then Ashworth spoke. He did not stand. He spoke from his seat, which was itself a choice, because the room was the kind of room that rewarded people who stood up to speak in it, and choosing not to was a way of saying that what he was about to say didn't require staging. The personnel question, he said, comes down to this. I arrived at this hospital 2 days ago to deliver classified military documents to a member of my former task force, to present a commendation that has been delayed for 3 years, and to address a working dog assignment. Those were the operational reasons. He looked at the table. What I observed in the 48 hours that followed was something that I think this board needs to understand, not as a military matter, but as an institutional one. He opened the folder. He placed the commendation document on the table and slid it toward Harwell, who picked it up. Lieutenant Lauren Mercer, Ashworth said, and she felt the room shift at the word lieutenant, felt people recalibrate, the way they do when a word lands that changes the frame of everything before it. Served as a tactical medical officer attached to Special Operations Task Force rotations over 2 deployment cycles. She held the highest individual medical decoration from that unit. When she separated from service 4 years ago, she came here. She has been doing, at Harrowfield Regional, a version of what she did in combat, identifying what the room needs, making the call that the room can't make yet, and doing it without asking to be recognized for it. He paused. The mass casualty incident yesterday was managed significantly better than it would have been without her involvement. That is not a criticism of your staff. Your staff performed. But Lauren Mercer is the reason 3 of those patients are alive today and not 2. That's the clinical fact. He looked at Harwell. I think you should know who you have. The room was quiet. Harwell set the commendation document down. He looked at Sylvia. Sylvia's face was doing something complicated. She had spent 14 years learning to be the most prepared person in any administrative room she entered, and the problem with the current room was that the preparation she had done was not for this meeting. She had prepared for a conversation about personnel boundaries and unauthorized medical procedures and the liability question around the chest tube. She had not prepared for a colonel with a declassified record and a commendation document and the specific moral clarity of a man who had seen her institution from outside for 48 hours and had already formed his conclusions. Director Raines, Harwell said. His voice was level, but it had an edge underneath it that came from someone who had read something before coming into this room and was now confirming it in real time. I'd like to discuss the documentation review I requested. I've been in the process of reviewing. I did my own review last night, Harwell said. Personnel files, the complaint log, the documentation flags on 6C for the past 12 months. He looked at her steadily. There are 11 incident notations on Lauren's file in that period. 7 of them are form-related. I reviewed the forms. 3 of the 7 reference a template update that was distributed on a Friday afternoon with a Monday compliance date and no all-staff notification. 4 of the 7 involve reports that were filed correctly but flagged retroactively. He paused. The other 4 notations are subjective, such as communication style assessments, fit evaluations. They don't cite specific incidents, they cite impressions. Sylvia opened her mouth. I also reviewed the complaint you cited yesterday, Harwell said. The family from last month. I pulled the full record. Lauren referred the family to the attending, per protocol, within 4 minutes of the conversation you referenced. The attending filed a note confirming the referral was appropriate. There is no record that this family submitted a formal complaint through any official channel. He looked at her. Where did the complaint originate? The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a room becomes very aware of what isn't being said. Sylvia's hands were flat on the table. I received a verbal account. From whom? Another pause. I don't recall the specific source. You don't recall, Harwell said. He didn't say it sarcastically. He said it the way you say something when you want the room to hold it without editorializing. Across the table, one of the external board members, a woman in her 60s who had said nothing since sitting down, was writing something on the notepad in front of her. She was writing more than someone taking meeting notes. She was writing with the kind of attention that meant she was recording something specific. The woman with the document case, the one who had arrived with Ashworth, reached across the table and quietly slid a folder to Harwell. He opened it, scanned the top page. The employee survey, he said. 6C, last quarter. He didn't read it aloud. He didn't need to. He turned it to face the table and the nearest board members leaned in, and whatever they read made the room temperature drop by a degree that had nothing to do with the building's HVAC. Lauren was watching Sylvia. Sylvia was watching the survey. She had seen it before. Of course she had. It had been in the departmental package that came through every quarter. She had filed it and moved on because the numbers in it had not alarmed her, or because she had decided they did not alarm her, which was not the same thing. Looking at it now, with the room looking at it alongside her, Lauren could see the moment Sylvia understood that the math had been done differently by other people than by herself. 14 of 16 nursing staff on 6C reported in the anonymous survey that they had experienced or witnessed intimidating or demeaning behavior from a direct supervisor in the last 6 months, Harwell read. Not loudly, with the quiet of a person who knows that quiet carries further. 11 indicated they had considered a transfer or resignation. 4 indicated they had been reluctant to report clinical concerns because of... He stopped. He looked at Sylvia. Because of anticipated retaliation. Sylvia said, "Those surveys are anonymous and voluntary," Harwell said. "Yes, and representative." He set the folder down. "I want to be very clear about something. The events of the past 48 hours have raised questions about personnel management on this floor that I should have been asking months ago. That is on me." He said it without deflection. "But the answers to those questions, now that I'm asking them, are not ambiguous." The external board member who had been writing stopped writing. "Mr. Harwell," she said, "I'd like to request that the HR director be brought in today, given what I'm seeing." "I've already requested that," Harwell said. "She'll be available at 11. Sylvia was very still. "Director Rains," Harwell said, "I'm going to ask you to step out for the remainder of this portion of the meeting. Someone will come get you when HR is ready." For a long moment, Sylvia did not move. Then she pushed her chair back. The sound of it on the floor was very clean and very loud in the quiet room. She stood. She picked up the portfolio in front of her with both hands, the way you pick something up when your hands need to be holding something. She did not look at Lauren. She walked to the door. She opened it. She went through it. The door closed. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Dr. Finch, from his position at the end of the table, said something that was quiet enough that Lauren almost didn't catch it. "I should have..." and then stopped and put his hand over his mouth and did not finish the sentence, and that incomplete sentence was somehow more honest than anything else he might have said. Harwell looked at Lauren. "I owe you an apology," he said, "from the institution." "What I'd like," Lauren said, "is for the staffing ratio on 6C to be reviewed." He looked at her. "And I'd like the form update protocol to include a minimum 14-day compliance window and a documented all-staff notification. Those are the 2 things that would actually fix something." Harwell looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. Then he picked up a pen and wrote both things down on the notepad in front of him. "Done," he said. Well, the meeting ended at 11:10. Lauren walked out of the administrative floor into the stairwell. She always took the stairs. and she sat down on the landing between the fourth and fifth floor and put her back against the wall and looked at the ceiling. Not because she was overwhelmed, not because she needed to recover, just because it was quiet in there and nobody was looking at her, and the quiet was useful. She sat there for 4 minutes, then she got up and went back to work. She was halfway through her afternoon rounds when Priya caught her at the station with an expression that was part disbelief and part the kind of satisfaction that comes from watching something land that should have landed a long time ago. "Rains is in an HR meeting," she said. "Has been for 2 hours." "I know." 3 other nurses were called in to give statements. "I know that too." Priya looked at her. "Are you okay?" Lauren was charting. She didn't look up. "Mr. Alderman's sepsis markers are down. That antibiotic change is working." Lauren. "Yeah." She kept writing. "I'm okay." Priya nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, yeah. And I know you don't need me to say it. Everyone on this floor knew." Lauren looked up, just for a second. "I know they did," she said. "That's what I couldn't figure out, why nobody said it." Priya looked at the floor. "People are afraid of the wrong things sometimes." "Yes," Lauren said. "They are." At 4 in the afternoon, she received a formal email from the medical director's office. It acknowledged the chest tube repositioning, noted that the procedure had been reviewed in the context of a patient emergency, and stated that the outcome had been positive and the decision had been made with appropriate clinical reasoning. It listed a required meeting with the medical director the following week. It was not a disciplinary notice. She read it twice. At 4:47, Ashworth texted her. "HR has requested Rains place herself on administrative leave pending investigation, effective today." She put the phone in her pocket. At 5 minutes to 5, the charge nurse from the night shift came up to the station for handoff, looked at the board, looked at Lauren, and said, "Heard it was a day." "Few days," Lauren said. "You good?" Getting there, she picked up the chart stack. "Let me walk you through the patients." She was midway through the handoff when her phone buzzed again. Unknown number this time. She glanced at it while the night charge was reviewing a note. It was a text from a number she did not recognize. Just a name and a time. Richard Harwell. Tomorrow. 8 a.m. My office. And below it, 4 words. "We need to talk seriously." She stared at those 4 words for longer than she stared at most things. Because in her experience, those 4 words, from someone in that position, at that moment, meant one of 2 very different things. And she was not yet certain which one it was. And she would not be certain until she walked into that office, and the next 12 hours were going to be spent in the particular suspended uncertainty of someone standing at a door they haven't opened yet. She did not sleep well. Not badly, exactly. She had slept in conditions that made this look like a rest cure. And she knew the difference between insomnia and the particular restlessness of a mind that was still running calculations after the body had stopped needing to. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about the 4 words in the text, and about the 2 things they could mean, and she did not try to resolve the uncertainty because it wasn't resolvable yet. That was the thing about doors. You had to open them to find out. She was up at 5:15. Coffee. The same piece of toast. She looked at her reflection while she was getting ready and noticed, without particular interest, that she looked tired around the eyes in a way that was going to be visible to anyone who looked at her directly, which was fine because she had never managed her appearance for other people's comfort. She drove to the hospital in the dark. The mountains were invisible against the sky, which at 5:40 in the morning was a dark that was just beginning to loosen at the eastern edge. She had made this drive so many times that her body did it on its own, and her mind was somewhere else. Not planning, not rehearsing, just quiet. She got to the hospital at 6:50. She had an hour before Harwell's office. She used it the way she used most hours, which was by going to 6C and doing work that needed doing. She reviewed the night charts. She caught 2 items in the overnight notes that required morning follow-up and flagged them for the day shift. She stood at the window at the end of the corridor for 3 minutes with her coffee and watched the parking lot fill slowly as the day staff arrived. And the mountains came back into visibility behind them in the particular gradual way of mountains in early light. Faint at first, then suddenly specific and enormous, as if they had always been there and you were simply being reminded. At 7:55, she took the elevator to the administrative floor. Harwell's assistant was a compact woman in her 50s named Greta, who had been at the hospital longer than anyone except the building itself, and who managed the CE's calendar with the quiet authority of someone who understood that scheduling is a form of power. She looked up when Lauren arrived, said, "He's expecting you," and waved her through without ceremony, which Lauren appreciated. Harwell's office was large without being ostentatious. The desk was good but not new. The windows faced the mountains. The shelves had actual books on them that showed signs of being read. He was standing at the window when she came in, and he turned and gestured to the chair across from the desk. "Coffee?" he asked. "I have some," she said, lifting the cup from the break room she was still carrying. He sat. She sat. He put his hands on the desk, not clasped, just resting, palms down, in the posture of someone who has decided to say something and is organizing it in the right order. "The HR investigation is formal as of this morning," he said. "Director Raines is on administrative leave, and that will remain in place until the investigation concludes. I want you to hear that from me directly rather than through the floor. I heard from Ashworth yesterday." "I know. I wanted to say it anyway." He looked at her. "The investigation scope covers the past 18 months of documented personnel interactions. HR has identified 4 additional staff members, 2 nurses, 1 tech, 1 resident on rotation, who have been approached and are giving statements." He paused. "The outcome of that process is not mine to predetermine, but I want you to understand the scope." Lauren nodded. "The second thing," he said, and here he shifted, a slight recalibration in his posture that meant he was moving from administrative fact to something that required more care. "I want to talk to you about what comes next, for you specifically." She waited. "The clinical review of the chest tube repositioning was completed this morning," he said. "Dr. Feynman's report, the ICU attending's notes, the outcome data. The medical director signed off an hour ago. It's been classified as a clinically justified emergency intervention with positive outcome, and it will be noted in your file as a demonstration of advanced clinical competency." He said it neutrally, but she could hear something underneath the neutrality that was closer to admiration and was working hard not to show it. "There will not be a disciplinary proceeding." "I understand," she said. "There is, however, a question I want to ask you." He leaned forward slightly. "And I want you to know that regardless of your answer, your position on 6C is fully secure. What happened with your documentation file? That review is complete, and all notations not supported by proper incident documentation have been removed. You're starting clean." "All right," she said. "The question is this." He looked at her steadily. "What do you actually want to be doing here? Not what you've been doing, not what you ended up doing during the MC1. What do you want?" Lauren looked at him. It was a question she had not been asked in a professional context in 4 years. In the Army, she had been told what she would do and had done it and had found meaning in the doing of it. At Harrowfield, she had chosen a role that was sustainable and purposeful and had not expected anyone to ask whether it was the right one. Nobody had asked, until now. She thought about the ED 2 days ago. She thought about the triage sequence in the ambulance bay and the chest tube, and the way the room had moved when she moved through it, not because she demanded it, but because a room under pressure will organize itself around whoever has the clearest read of the situation, and she had been that person, and she had known she was that person, and the knowing had been both familiar and strange because she had spent 4 years not knowing that about herself inside a building. "The trauma systems here are fragmented," she said, "not because the people are bad, because there's no one whose job it is to look at the whole picture. Protocols for mass casualty response, handoff between floors, triage criteria for when things overflow, they exist as separate documents in different departments that were last updated at different times." She stopped. If someone were looking at that as a system rather than a collection of procedures, it would be a different hospital. Harwell was listening the way people listen when they're not waiting for their turn to talk. The ED could run a better MCI response with 2 fewer staff if the protocol was built right, she said. 6C loses hours every week to hand off gaps that a standard protocol would fix in a month. The ICU chest tube situation last night happened partly because the escalation tree for a deteriorating chest patient had a 6-minute gap in it. She looked at him. "I noticed these things in the first week I was here. I have been watching them for 4 years." Harwell said, "Would you write it down?" She blinked. "Write what down?" "What you just told me, all of it, and whatever else you've been noticing for 4 years." He picked up a pen. "I want to create a position, Director of Clinical Systems Integration. It doesn't exist yet. I'm creating it. The scope would be emergency protocol development, cross-departmental handoff standardization, mass casualty preparedness. Exactly what you described." He wrote something on the notepad. "I want you in it." She looked at the notepad. "That's a significant administrative role. It's a clinical role that requires administrative authority. There's a difference." He looked up. "You would still be clinical. You would still be in the building. You would not be managing staff performance reviews or budget presentations. You would be fixing the system." He paused. "You'd have a team, small, but 2 people to start. Budget for protocol development and simulation training." Lauren sat with it for a moment. She thought about 6C. She thought about Priya, and about the float nurses who covered the gaps, and about Mr. Alderman whose sepsis had been caught because she had been there, and had been paying attention and had known what to look for. She thought about the escalation tree with the 6-minute gap in it. "I'd need to keep patient contact," she said. "Not a full floor assignment, but clinical hours." "Built into the role," he said immediately. "Simulation training requires someone who is current in practice. I'd want approval authority for protocol changes, not just advisory." "Yes. And I want the 6C staffing ratio reviewed before the end of the month. That's not negotiable." He wrote it down. "Also not a problem." He looked at her. "Anything else?" She thought about it. "The form update protocol. 14-day window, documented all staff notification," he said. "Already in process from yesterday." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back without rushing her. "All right," she said. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief, the grip of someone who meant the thing they had just agreed to and didn't need to perform it. "Welcome to a different version of the job you've already been doing," he said. The formal announcement went out to department heads at 11 that morning in an email that Lauren did not write and did not read until Priya forwarded it to her phone with a string of punctuation that communicated more than any specific words would have. She was in 6C when she read it, at the station, between chart entries. She put the phone back in her pocket and kept writing. Priya appeared at her elbow 20 seconds later. "Director of Clinical Systems Integration," she said. "That's what it says." "Lauren." "Priya, you're not even going to—" Priya stopped, shook her head. "Of course you're not." She was quiet for a second, and then she said with the particular honesty of someone who had spent 8 months watching something and had finally decided to say it, "I am going to be a good nurse because of watching you work. I want you to know that." Lauren stopped writing. She looked at Priya. The younger woman was not performing the statement. She had said it the way people say things when they have held them for a while and finally found the right moment to put them down. It was not a request for anything. It was just a thing that was true. "Then pay it to someone else when you're where I am," Lauren said. "That's how it works." Priya nodded. Her eyes were doing something she was clearly trying to keep under control, which she managed mostly. "Okay," she said. "I'll let you finish your chart." She walked away. Lauren looked at the chart in front of her. She finished the entry, capped her pen, and sat there for a moment in the ambient noise of the floor she had worked for 4 years. The monitors, the PA, the particular hollow roll of a medication cart on linoleum, and let herself feel, just briefly, what it felt like to have something land the way it was supposed to. Not triumphant, not relieved. Something quieter and more durable than either of those things. The feeling of having held a position for a long time under conditions that made holding it difficult and not having moved. The formal HR investigation outcome was released 2 weeks later. Lauren read the summary, the same way she read everything. Fully, without skimming, from top to bottom. It was 14 pages. She read all 14. Sylvia Raines had been found, after interviews with 31 staff members across 3 departments and a review of documentation records spanning 22 months, to have engaged in a sustained pattern of retaliatory management, targeting staff who raised clinical concerns, manipulating documentation flags to build performance cases against nurses who were perceived as challenges to her authority, and creating a supervisory environment in which fear of reprisal actively suppressed patient safety reporting. The complaint against Lauren, the family complaint that Sylvia had cited in the hallway, had no documentary origin. HR had searched every channel and found nothing. The investigation characterized it as fabricated and noted it in the finding. Sylvia Raines' employment was terminated, effective the date of the finding. Her certification with the state nursing regulatory body had been referred for review. The referral meant she could not take another director of nursing role anywhere in the state without the review board's clearance, and the finding document that would accompany any future application would be public. Dr. Graham Finch had submitted a voluntary statement. It was not required of him. He had asked to give one. In it, he had acknowledged that he had been present during at least 2 instances of what he now understood to be retaliatory management, and that he had not intervened, and that his failure to intervene had contributed to conditions that harmed staff and, by extension, patients. He had not asked for anything in return for the statement. He had simply wanted it to be in the record. It was in the record. Lauren put the document down on her desk, her new desk, in her new office, which was a small room on the 3rd floor that had previously been used for storage and now had a window and a chair and a whiteboard she had already covered in a system diagram that nobody else could fully interpret yet, but which made complete sense to her. She put the document down, and she sat back, and she looked at the whiteboard. 3 days earlier, she had presented the preliminary mass casualty protocol framework to a working group of ED, ICU, and floor-charge nurses. The session had run 90 minutes and had produced 47 specific protocol adjustments, a new escalation tree for deteriorating respiratory patients with no gap in it, and a standing simulation exercise schedule that would run quarterly. Darnell had said, afterward, that it was the most useful clinical meeting he had attended in 6 years at Harrowfield. He had said it directly, without ceremony, which was the only way he said things, and she had taken it the same way. The chest tube protocol now had a specific procedure embedded in it for emergency repositioning by a qualified nurse in the absence of a surgeon, with defined criteria and documentation requirements. It had gone through the medical director's office and the clinical review board and had come back approved in 7 days, which was apparently fast for Harrowfield and which Lauren had been told to feel pleased about. She felt adequately pleased about it. Ashworth came back on a Thursday afternoon in early December when the first snow of the year was sitting on the mountain range to the west in a way that made it look like the edges of the world had been outlined in white. He did not announce he was coming. He appeared in the doorway of her office with Sargent at his heel and looked at the whiteboard and then at her. "Still just as legible as your tactical maps," he said. "My tactical maps were perfectly legible." "To you?" She moved a stack of folders from the second chair, and he sat down. Sargent went to the corner and lay down in the particular way of a working dog who had decided a location was acceptable and was prepared to stay there indefinitely. "The commendation presentation," Ashworth said. "Command wants to do it formally. There's been a request from the hospital, Harwell's office, to hold it here, in the building." Lauren said nothing. "It doesn't have to be a large thing," he said. "There are people who want to be there, your staff, the MCI patients who've been discharged. 3 of them reached out through the hospital's patient relations office and asked if there was going to be something. Nobody solicited that." He looked at her. "And Wills asked." He specifically asked. She thought about Wills on the curb with his gloves on and the cup of water she had set beside him and the thing he had said about doing everything right and it not working anyway. She thought about the 68-year-old woman who had not come back and the way that loss had sat in the building's ambulance bay like something physical that everyone had to walk through on the way in and out. "Small," she said. "Staff, the patients who want to come, your people. No press." "No press," he confirmed. "And Wills gives his patient's family the time they need first," she said, "before anything else happens. I want that arranged." Ashworth looked at her. "I'll make the call today." "Good." He looked at the whiteboard again. "How's the roll?" "Harder than the floor in some ways, less hard in others." She looked at the diagram. "There's a lot to fix." "There always is. But it's fixable. That's the part I didn't know when I got here." She paused. "I thought I was coming to a place where I could do the work quietly and go home. I didn't think it was a place that could actually change. What changed your mind? She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she thought about things. The patients, she said finally. Not the incident, not the military visit. Just 4 years of patients who deserved a better system and were getting a worse one because the people running it had been afraid of the wrong things for too long. She looked at him. That's what I kept coming back to. Ashworth nodded slowly. It was the nod of someone who had known her for a long time and was hearing something that was consistent with everything he had known. Sergeant is being formally reassigned, he said. New handler comes on in January. Is he ready for it? Ashworth looked at the dog in the corner. Sergeant had his head on his paws and his eyes half closed in the drowsy contentment of an animal that was exactly where it wanted to be. Probably not, he said. He's been difficult since the handler rotation. He needs someone patient, Lauren said, and someone who isn't going to try to outpace him. He works better when the person working with him is calm. I'll pass that to the training team. Tell them he's smarter than most of the people who will be handling him, and if they approach it from that direction, they'll have a better time. Ashworth almost smiled. I'll tell them. Sergeant's ear twitched. Ukat. The commendation presentation was held on a Friday afternoon in the second week of December, in the hospital's main atrium, the open-plan space on the ground floor that connected the main entrance to the elevator bank, and which was large enough to hold the 70 or so people who had come without feeling crowded. The hospital had put up nothing decorative, no bunting, no formal staging, a small raised area at one end, a few rows of chairs, the rest standing. It looked like what it was, which was a group of people who worked in a building, and some people who had been patients in it, and a handful of military personnel, gathered in the middle of the day because something needed to be acknowledged. Lauren stood at the front in her work scrubs and her badge, which she had not changed for the occasion because she had thought about it and decided that changing would have been dishonest. This was what she was, and the ceremony was for this, not for something performed. Ashworth stood to her left in dress uniform. 2 of his unit were behind him. Wills was there, in service uniform, looking older than he had 2 weeks ago in the way that 23-year-olds sometimes look when they have been through something that has added something that doesn't come off. Harwell spoke briefly. He was not a man who used more words than necessary, which Lauren had come to appreciate, and he used 4 minutes to say what needed to be said. That the institution had failed a member of its staff, that it was taking that failure seriously, and that it intended to be a different kind of place. He said Lauren's name once, and said the rest of it about the institution, which was the right ratio. Ashworth read the commendation citation. He read it in full. It was the first time Lauren had heard it read aloud by another person in a room of people who knew her, and she had expected it to feel like exposure, like having something taken from a private drawer and held up to the light. It did not feel like that. It felt like something being set down properly, after being carried at the wrong angle for a long time. The citation described 2 hours and 17 minutes of a day 6 years ago, without flourish, without the language of heroism that would have made it sound like something that happened to a character in a story. It described clinical decisions and their outcomes. It described a fragmentation injury that was noted post-event after the last patient had been loaded, which was stated as a fact without commentary. It ended with the names of the 6 casualties who had been recovered, and the notation that both patients originally classified as expectant had survived. The room was very quiet. Lauren received the decoration the way she had been trained to receive decorations, which was with both hands and a straight back and eyes forward, and then she shook Ashworth's hand, and then she turned to the room. She had not prepared remarks. She had thought about it and decided that prepared remarks were for people who needed to manage the moment from the outside, and she was going to manage it from the inside or not at all. I've been a nurse for 11 years, she said. 8 of those years, in one form or another, I was working in environments where the decisions were fast and the consequences were immediate, and you didn't have time to wonder if you were doing the right thing. You just had to know. She looked at the room, the staff she had worked alongside for 4 years, the patients in chairs who had come back to a place they had been in crisis to stand in it now, on their own feet. Wills in his uniform. Priya standing near the back with her arms crossed and her jaw set, in the particular way she held herself when she was trying not to show emotion and was not entirely succeeding. The last 4 years, I thought I was stepping back from that. I thought I was choosing something smaller. She paused. I was wrong, she said. This hospital, this floor, this ED, these patients, it's the same work. It has always been the same work. You're keeping people alive in the space between what the system can do and what the situation requires. You're doing it every shift, with equipment that's aging and ratios that are wrong and administrators who sometimes see a number where you see a person. She stopped again, briefly. And most of you have been doing it without anyone telling you that it's extraordinary. Because it is. Every single shift. She looked at the room and not past it. What happened 3 weeks ago? The MCY, the incident with the chest tube, all of it, that happened because there were people in this building who knew what to do and did it. That's not about me. That's about what this staff is capable of when the system gets out of their way. She held it for a beat. So that's what I'm going to spend the next part of my career doing, getting the system out of your way. She stopped there. The room was quiet for a moment, and then it wasn't. Not a performance of applause, not the polished response of people who had been told when to react, but the real and slightly ragged sound of people in a room who felt something and were expressing it without being organized about it. Darnell, at the back wall with his arms folded, did not clap. He stood with his jaw set and his eyes doing something that he would have been furious to have noted, and Lauren noticed it, and did not note it aloud, and filed it in the category of things she would carry with her without speaking about them. Priya was clapping and had given up on managing her face. Wills had his hands together and was looking at the floor, which Lauren understood was not disengagement, but its opposite. After, in the parking lot, when most people had filtered back inside and the winter light was flat and cold and the mountains were the specific gray-white of December at elevation, Ashworth stood beside her at the edge of the building's shadow and said nothing for a while. Sargent was between them, head swiveling between both people in the methodical way he covered ground. You know, Ashworth said finally, when you told me 4 years ago that you were going to take a floor nursing position at a regional hospital in Colorado, I thought you were... He stopped. Wasting it? She said. I thought you needed time, he said, which was more honest than what he'd started to say, and they both knew it. I thought you'd be back in 6 months. I know you did. I was wrong. Yes, she said. You were. He looked out at the parking lot. What did it actually give you, these 4 years? She thought about it without rushing it, the way she did. It gave me the part I didn't learn in the field, she said. In the field, the stakes were obvious. Everyone knew what mattered. There was no ambiguity about what you were doing or why. She looked at the building behind them, the windows, the lit corridors, the ordinary motion of an ordinary hospital afternoon. Here, you have to decide every day what matters, and nobody is going to tell you you're right, and the consequences come slowly enough that you could convince yourself they're not connected to you. She paused. That's harder, actually, in a different way. Ashworth looked at her. And I got better at it, she said, at the deciding. He nodded. Sargent pushed his head against her hand and she let him, and she scratched the back of his ears in the specific spot, and he leaned into it with the uncomplicated sincerity of an animal who did not know how to want things at the wrong time or in the wrong proportion. His new handler comes on January 14th, Ashworth said. I know. If it doesn't work, give it 6 months before you decide, she said. He's adjustable. He just needs someone who understands that he's not going to follow you if he doesn't respect you first. Also a problem with other people I've worked with, Ashworth said. Probably, she said. She gave Sargent's ears one more scratch, and then she straightened up, and she walked back through the hospital's main entrance into the warmth and the sound of it. She had a 3 o'clock meeting with the ED charge and the ICU attending about the new escalation protocol, and she needed the documentation from her office before she got there. She took the stairs. On the landing between 3 and 4, she stopped for a moment. Not because she was tired, not because she needed to breathe. She stopped because the landing was quiet, and she had learned over 4 years that quiet in this building was something you took when it appeared because it didn't stay, and because she wanted to sit with what had just happened before the next thing started. She thought about the woman she had been when she walked into Harrowfield Regional Medical Center for the first time 4 years ago, with a resume that told half a story and a deliberate intention to be unremarkable. She thought about what it had felt like to choose that, to hand in a form that listed her nursing qualifications and her undergraduate work and her last civilian employer, and to leave the rest of it in a filing cabinet somewhere and come here and just be a nurse, just do the work, just disappear into the ordinary and let it be enough. She had not been wrong to want that. She had needed what those 4 years gave her. The grief and the quiet, the adjustment, the slow recovery of something that was not quite trust in institutions, but was adjacent to it. The patients, the hundreds of them, over 4 years, each one a complete case with a human being at the center of it that required her full attention and nothing she couldn't give. She had needed all of it. But Priya had said something that had stuck. People are afraid of the wrong things sometimes. Lauren had spent 4 years being afraid of being seen, and the fear had been reasonable, and it had served its purpose, and it was done now. She had been seen. The world had not ended. The patients were still there, waiting, the same as always. She was going to do the work. She went up the stairs. There is a kind of strength that does not announce itself. It doesn't walk into a room looking for recognition, doesn't raise its voice to be heard, doesn't need the moment to perform in. It just shows up, shift after shift, and does what the situation requires, and absorbs the dismissals and the small humiliations and the systems built by people who stopped paying attention and keeps doing the work anyway. And sometimes, not always, not on any schedule, not as a reward because the world doesn't work on that kind of ledger. Sometimes the work turns around and shows you what it has been building. Lauren Mercer did not become who she was in the moment the military vehicles pulled into the parking lot, or in the moment the commendation was read aloud, or in the moment the boardroom turned to look at the person who had been overlooked. She had been who she was every morning at 5:15, every handoff at 6, every patient who asked, "Am I going to be fine?" and deserved a real answer. The rest of it was just the world catching up.